A giant widow thought her husband died years ago in a mine collapse that swallowed 17 men whole, until two little girls no taller than her waist walked through her barn door at sunset, dusty from a 100-mile journey, and called her Mummy. Clara Thornhill stood 6 feet 7 inches in her stockings, a widow who could lift a full-grown steer, but couldn't lift the weight of grief that had crushed her for 5 winters. She had buried an empty casket with her husband's name carved into the wood. She had burned his clothes. She had sworn never to hope again, but these twin girls, identical, fragile, barely 5 years old, stared up at her with his eyes, their small hands clutching a letter she'd written in her own hand, a letter she never remembered sending. They knew her name. They knew the scar on her wrist from the barbed wire. They knew the lullaby she hummed when no one was listening, and they whispered one impossible question that shattered everything she thought she knew. Mummy, is Daddy coming home too? Clara's hands froze on the pitchfork. The barn air smelled of hay and dust and something she couldn't name, something like memory made solid. She stared down at the children, and her throat closed. The pitchfork slipped from her fingers and hit the dirt with a dull thud that echoed too loud in the silence. One of the girls stepped forward. Her dress was patched at the knees, her face smudged with trail dust, but her chin tilted up with a courage that didn't belong on someone so small. She held out the folded paper like it was made of glass. A man gave this to us. He said you'd know what it meant. Clara didn't move. Couldn't move. Her pulse drummed in her ears like hoofbeats on hard ground. She looked at the letter, at the familiar slant of her own handwriting bleeding through the paper. She had written dozens of letters after Thomas disappeared. Letters she never sent. Letters she burned in the stove one cold November night when hope finally died. Where did you get that? Her voice came out rough, low, like gravel scraped across iron. The second girl spoke this time, quieter, shy. From Daddy. He told us if anything happened to him, we should find the tallest woman in Wyoming. The one with hands big enough to hold the world but a heart too scared to try. Clara's knees buckled. She caught herself against the barn post, her breath coming short and shallow. That's not possible. He said you'd say that. The braver twin smiled just a little, and it was Thomas's smile, crooked on one side, mischief buried under sadness. He said to tell you the stars don't lie, and neither does the girl who counts them when she can't sleep. The world tilted. Clara pressed her palm against her chest, feeling her heart slam against her ribs like it was trying to escape. Thomas used to say that. Every night when insomnia kept her awake, when her sighs made her feel like a freak in a world built too small, he would sit with her on the porch and point at constellations until her breathing slowed. "Who are you?" she whispered. "We're Emma and Eliza," the first girl said. "And we're yours." Clara sank to her knees in the dirt, and suddenly she was eye level with them, close enough to see the freckles scattered across their noses, close enough to see the way their hair curled at the ends, just like hers did before she started pinning it back in a severe bun, close enough to smell the wood smoke clinging to their clothes and the faint scent of lavender soap. She reached out with one massive hand, trembling, and touched Emma's cheek. The girl didn't flinch, didn't pull away. She leaned into the touch like she'd been starving for it. "How?" Clara's voice cracked. "How is this real?" Eliza unfolded the letter and held it up. Clara recognized it instantly, the one she'd written the week after their wedding, sealed and tucked into Thomas's coat pocket before he left for the mine. A promise written in ink. "If I ever lose you, I'll find you in the faces of the children we'll have. I'll know them by their eyes, but there had been no children. The mine had collapsed before they'd even tried. And Thomas had been gone. He kept it," Emma said softly. "He said it was the only thing that survived the cave-in. It was in his shirt pocket, right over his heart." Clara's vision blurred. Tears she hadn't let herself cry in 5 years burned hot down her cheeks, and she didn't wipe them away. She pulled both girls into her arms, and they came willingly, folding into her like they'd always belonged there. She was so much bigger than them, her body swallowing theirs completely, but they clung to her with fierce little hands. "Where is he?" she whispered into their hair. "Where's your daddy?" The girls went still. Emma pulled back just enough to meet Clara's eyes, and the grief there was too old, too heavy for a 5-year-old to carry. "He's dying, Mummy," she said, "and he sent us to you before he's gone." Clara didn't sleep that night. She sat in the kitchen with a lantern burning low, watching Emma and Eliza curled together on the old horsehair sofa her mother had left her. Their breathing was soft and even, their faces peaceful in a way that made Clara's chest ache. She'd given them bread and butter, warmed milk with honey, and they had eaten like they hadn't seen food in days. When she asked where they'd come from, Emma said only, "The mountains. 3 days' walk." 3 days. These babies had walked 3 days alone. Clara's hands shook as she unfolded the letter again, reading it by the weak orange glow of the lamp. Her own words stared back at her, young and hopeful, and so foolish. She had believed in forever back then, believed that love was enough to keep a person safe. The mine collapse had taught her different. She remembered the day they told her, 17 men gone, no survivors. The foreman had stood on her porch, hat in his hands, and said Thomas's name like an apology. She remembered nodding, remembered thanking him, remembered closing the door and standing in the center of the empty house, waiting to feel something. The feeling came later, in the dark, in the silence, in the way her body, too big and too strong, suddenly felt useless. Now the letter sat on the table, and with it a small leather pouch the girls had carried. Inside was a lock of dark hair tied with string, a wooden button carved in the shape of a bear, and a ring. Her ring, the one she'd given Thomas the morning he'd left for the mine, pressed into his palm with a kiss. "Wear it until you come home," she'd said. He never had. Clara touched the ring with one finger, then pulled her hand back like it had burned her. If he was alive, if he had been alive all this time, why hadn't he come back? The question sat heavy in her gut, sour and sharp. Behind her, a floorboard creaked. She turned. Emma stood in the doorway, barefoot, her hair loose around her shoulders. She looked so small, framed by the darkness. "You're angry," Emma said. Clara blinked. "I'm not. You are. I can see it." Emma crossed the room and climbed into the chair beside Clara. Her legs dangled, not even close to reaching the floor. "Daddy said you would be. He said we should give you time." Clara's throat burned. Why didn't he come himself? "He can't walk anymore," Emma said simply. "The cave-in broke his back. He's been in bed for 2 years. A doctor man said he's got maybe a month left, maybe less." The words landed like stones in still water, rippling out in waves Clara couldn't stop. She pressed her palms flat against the table, trying to steady herself. "Where is he?" 2 days north. "A camp near the Bitterroot. There's a woman there, Mrs. Callahan. She's been taking care of him since the mine. She's the one who helped us come find you." Clara closed her eyes. 2 days north. He had been 2 days away this whole time. Why didn't he send word? Her voice cracked. "Why did he let me think he was dead?" Emma's face crumpled, and for the first time she looked like the child she was. "He thought you were dead too, Mummy. The foreman told everyone the whole ridge collapsed. He said no one in the lower camps survived. Daddy looked for you. Mrs. Callahan said he crawled out of the rubble and walked 20 miles on a broken back, calling your name. But when he got to town, they said Clara Thornhill died in the collapse. They said they'd already buried you." The room spun. Clara gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white. "That's not. There was no collapse near here. I was home. They lied," Emma whispered. "Mrs. Callahan said the mine boss didn't want to pay the families, so he said everyone died. All 17 men. All the workers in the lower camps. He took the insurance money and ran." Rage, white-hot and vicious, surged through Clara's chest. She stood so fast the chair scraped back, and Emma flinched. Clara froze, then slowly knelt beside the girl, forcing her voice to soften. "I'm not angry at you, sweetheart. I'm angry at them. Emma nodded, tears sliding down her cheeks. Daddy said you'd want to kill someone when you found out. He made me promise to tell you he tried. He tried so hard to come back. Clara pulled the girl into her arms and held her tight, rocking slightly, her mind racing. Thomas was alive. Broken, dying, but alive, and he'd spent 5 years thinking she was gone. "Does he know you're here?" Clara asked quietly. Emma nodded against her shoulder. "He told us to come. He said even if he dies, we'd still have you. He said you'd be enough." Something inside Clara fractured, clean and sharp. She pulled back, cupping Emma's face in her hands. "Where's your sister's name again?" "Eliza. And you're Emma." "Yes, Mom." Clara's thumb brushed away a tear from the girl's cheek. "You tell me the truth now. Is your daddy really dying?" Emma's lip trembled. "Yes, Mummy, he coughs blood. He can't eat. Mrs. Callahan says his lungs are giving up." Clara stood, her decision made before she even realized she'd made it. She crossed to the cabinet, pulled down a canvas sack and began filling it with supplies. Dried meat, hardtack, a canteen, a wool blanket. Her hands moved fast, efficient, the way they did when a cow was birthing or a fence needed mending before a storm. Emma watched, eyes wide. "What are you doing?" Clara didn't stop packing. "We're leaving at first light. You, me, and your sister. We're going to bring your daddy home. But, Mummy, he can't travel." The doctor said. Clara turned and her voice was iron. "I don't care what the doctor said. If Thomas Thornhill is dying, he's dying in his own bed, in his own house, with his family around him. Not in some camp 2 days away." Emma stared at her and then, slowly, she smiled. It was a fierce, bright thing, full of hope Clara hadn't seen in years. "Daddy said you were strong enough to fight God if you had to." Clara knelt again, meeting the girl's eyes. "Your daddy's wrong. I can't fight God, but I can fight time. And I can fight death, and I will fight every single mile between here and him if that's what it takes." She stood, slinging the sack over her shoulder. "Go wake your sister. We leave in 2 hours." Emma ran, and Clara Thornhill, the giant widow who thought hope was dead, felt it flicker back to life in her chest like a flame refusing to go out. The wagon wheels cut through the dirt, like a promise Clara wasn't sure she could keep. Dawn hadn't fully broken yet. Just a thin line of gold bleeding along the eastern ridge, turning the prairie grass from black to silver. The air was cold enough to sting, and Clara's breath puffed out in clouds as she snapped the reins. Beside her, Emma and Eliza sat bundled in wool blankets, their eyes heavy but watchful. They hadn't spoken much since leaving. Clara didn't push. She could feel the weight pressing down on all 3 of them. The kind of silence that comes when words feel too small for what's happening. The horses moved steady, their hooves a rhythmic thud against the packed earth. Clara had hitched her 2 strongest mares and loaded the wagon with everything she thought they'd need. A stretcher, quilts, medicine, whiskey for the pain, and a stubborn, desperate hope she didn't know how to name. By mid-morning, the sun was high and merciless. The land stretched flat and endless in every direction, dotted with sagebrush and the occasional twisted pine. Clara's back ached from holding the reins, but she didn't slow. Couldn't slow. Every hour that passed was an hour Thomas might not have. "Mummy." Eliza's voice was small, almost lost in the wind. Clara glanced down. "Yes, baby?" "Are you scared?" Clara's hands tightened on the reins. She thought about lying. Thought about saying something strong and certain, the kind of thing a mother should say. But when she looked at Eliza's face, open and trusting, she couldn't do it. "Yes," Clara said quietly. "I'm terrified." Eliza nodded like that made sense. "Daddy's scared too. He tries to hide it, but I can tell." "How do you know?" "He holds our hands real tight when he thinks we're asleep. And he whispers things. Prayers, I think. Or maybe just talking to God. I don't know if God listens, but Daddy talks anyway." Clara's throat tightened. She could see him so clearly in her mind. Thomas, broken and afraid, whispering into the dark. The image made her want to scream. "God listens," Clara said, though she wasn't sure she believed it. "Even when it doesn't feel like it." They rode in silence after that, the sun climbing higher, the heat pressing down. Clara's mind drifted, pulling her back to the last morning she'd seen Thomas. He'd kissed her on the porch, his hands rough and warm against her face. She had stood there taller than him by half a foot, and he'd grinned up at her like she was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. "Don't look at me like that," she'd said, embarrassed. "Like what?" "Like I'm normal." He'd pulled her down by the collar and kissed her again, harder. "You're not normal. You're extraordinary. And I'm the luckiest man alive." She had watched him ride away, his back straight, his hat tilted just so, and she'd never seen him again, until now. Maybe, by late afternoon, they crossed into rougher country. The land tilted upward, the trail narrowing as pine trees thickened on either side. The temperature dropped, and the air smelled of resin and cold stone. Clara pushed the horses harder, ignoring the protest in her shoulders. "There," Emma said suddenly, pointing ahead. Clara followed her gaze. Through the trees, she could see smoke rising thin and grey against the sky. A camp. Her heart kicked hard against her ribs. "That's it?" Emma nodded. "Mrs. Callahan's place." Clara guided the wagon down the slope, the wheels bouncing over roots and rocks. As they got closer, she could make out a small cabin, rough-built and listing slightly to one side. A woman stood in the doorway, arms crossed, watching them approach. She was older, maybe 60, with silver hair pinned back and a face carved by hard years. Clara pulled the wagon to a stop and climbed down. The woman's eyes traveled up, taking in Clara's full height. If she was surprised, she didn't show it. "You're Clara Thornhill," the woman said. "Not a question, I am." The woman nodded slowly. "I'm Maeve Callahan. The girls told you?" "They told me." Maeve's expression softened, and Clara saw something like pity flicker there. "He's inside. Been asking for you since the day he woke up from the cave-in. Didn't believe me when I said you were gone. Took him 2 years to stop looking." Clara's chest felt like it was caving in. "Is he?" "He's alive, barely, but he's been holding on. I think he knew somehow. Knew you'd come." Clara moved toward the cabin, but Maeve stepped in front of her, one hand raised. "Wait, you need to know. He's not the man you remember. The collapse did things, bad things. His back's shattered. His lungs are scarred. He's in pain every second of every day, and he's got maybe days left. Maybe hours. I don't know." Maeve's voice cracked. "I've done what I can, but I'm not a miracle worker." Clara's hands curled into fists at her sides. "I don't need a miracle. I just need him." Maeve stared at her for a long moment, then stepped aside. "He's in the back room. Go easy. He doesn't know you're coming." Clara ducked through the low doorway, her shoulders brushing the frame. Inside, the cabin was dim and smelled of wood smoke and something medicinal. She moved through the narrow hall, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. The door to the back room was open. She stepped inside, and there he was. Thomas lay in a narrow bed pushed against the wall, his body so still. She thought for a horrible second that she was too late. But then his chest rose, shallow and labored, and she heard the wet rattle of his breathing. He looked so small. That was the first thing that hit her. Thomas, who had always seemed larger than life, was a shadow. His face was gaunt, his skin grey, his hair streaked with white that hadn't been there before. His eyes were closed, and his hands lay limp on top of the blanket. Clara crossed the room slowly, afraid that if she moved too fast, he'd disappear. She knelt beside the bed, and even kneeling, she was nearly level with him. "Thomas," she whispered. His eyes opened, slowly, like it took everything he had. And then he saw her. His breath caught, his lips parted, and tears spilled down his cheeks, fast and silent. "Clara," his voice was a rasp, barely audible. Are you real?" She reached out and took his hand. It was cold, too cold, and so much smaller than she remembered. "I'm real." He stared at her like she was a ghost, like she might vanish if he blinked. "They said you were dead." "They said, I know what they said. But I'm here. I'm here, Thomas." His fingers tightened around hers, weak but desperate. "The girls, they found me. Emma and Eliza, they're outside. They're safe." A sob broke out of him, raw and shattered. "I thought I'd never see you again. I thought..." God, Clara, I thought I'd lost everything. She leaned forward, pressing her forehead against his. You didn't lose me. I'm right here, and I'm not going anywhere. He cried then, really cried, and Clara held his hand and let him. She didn't tell him it would be okay. Didn't make promises she couldn't keep. She just stayed. After a long time, his breathing steadied. He looked up at her, his eyes red but clear. I'm dying, he said quietly. I know. I don't want to die here. Clara's jaw tightened. You're not going to. I'm taking you home. Clara, I can't. Yes, you can. I'm strong enough to carry you, and I've got a wagon, and we're leaving as soon as you're ready. You're going to die in your own bed, Thomas Thornhill, with your wife and your daughters around you. That's not a request. He stared at her, and then impossibly he smiled. It was weak and broken, but it was his smile. You haven't changed, he whispered. Neither have you. He closed his eyes, still holding her hand. Take me home, Clara. I will. And she meant it. They left at dawn, the world still caught between dark and light. Clara had lined the wagon bed with every quilt and blanket Maeve could spare, building a nest soft enough to cradle a man made of glass. Thomas lay in the center, his body so fragile she was afraid the jolting of the road might break him further. Emma and Eliza sat on either side of him, their small hands resting on his arms like they could hold him to the earth through sheer will. Maeve stood in the doorway as they pulled away, her face unreadable. You're a fool, Clara Thornhill, she'd said. But you're a fool with a heart too big to be smart, Clara hadn't answered. She just snapped the reins and headed south. The journey back was slower. Every rock, every rut in the trail made Clara's stomach twist. She could hear Thomas breathing behind her, each inhale a struggle, each exhale a surrender. The girls sang to him sometimes, soft little songs with words Clara didn't recognize. Thomas would hum along when he had the strength, his voice a thread of sound that broke her heart over and over. By midday, they stopped to rest the horses. Clara climbed into the wagon and knelt beside Thomas, pressing a damp cloth to his forehead. His skin was hot, fever burning through him like wildfire. How are you holding up? She asked. He opened his eyes, and the pain there was so raw she had to look away. I've been better. We're halfway home. Just a little longer. Clara. His hand found hers, weak but insistent. If I don't make it, don't. Listen to me. His voice was firm despite the rattle in his chest. If I don't make it, you take care of them. You love them the way I couldn't. You give them the life we talked about. You hear me? Clara's vision blurred. You're going to make it. Promise me. She wanted to argue. Wanted to tell him he was wrong, that he'd see the ranch again, that they'd have time. But the look in his eyes stopped her. He knew. He'd always known, I promise, she whispered. He nodded, satisfied, and closed his eyes. Good. That's good. They reached the ranch as the sun dipped low, painting everything gold and red. Clara had never been so grateful to see the crooked fence posts, the sagging barn, the little house that had felt so empty for so long. She pulled the wagon right up to the porch and lifted Thomas herself, cradling him against her chest like a child. He weighed almost nothing. The girls ran ahead, throwing open the door, and Clara carried him inside and laid him gently on the bed they used to share. The room smelled like dust and memories. Clara opened the window to let in fresh air, then sat beside him, her hand covering his. Emma and Eliza climbed onto the bed, one on each side, and the four of them stayed like that as the light faded and the stars began to appear. Tell me about the stars, Thomas said, his voice barely there. Clara looked out the window. The sky was deep purple, scattered with pinpricks of light. Which ones do you want to hear about? All of them. The way you used to, when you couldn't sleep, so she did. She told him about Orion the hunter, about Cassiopeia the vain queen, about the Pleiades sisters who ran from the world and found safety in the sky. She told him the stories her father had told her, and the ones she'd made up herself on lonely nights when Thomas was gone and the house was too quiet. The girls listened, their eyes wide, and Thomas smiled. I missed this, he murmured. Missed your voice. Missed everything. I'm here now. We're all here. I know. His breathing was getting shallower, the spaces between each breath stretching longer. "Clara?" "Yes?" "I love you." I never stopped. Not for 1 second. Her tears came fast and hot, spilling over. "I love you too. God, Thomas, I love you so much. I'm sorry. Sorry I couldn't come back sooner. Sorry I let you think." "Shh, don't. You're here now. That's all that matters." He looked at the girls, his eyes soft. "You take care of your mama, you hear me? She's stronger than anyone I've ever known, but that doesn't mean she doesn't need you." Emma nodded, tears streaming down her face. Eliza buried her face in his shoulder, sobbing quietly. Thomas looked back at Clara. "Thank you for finding me, for bringing me home." "Always," Clara whispered. "Always." He smiled one last time, and then his eyes closed. His chest rose once more, held, and then fell, and didn't rise again. The room was silent, except for the sound of the girls crying and Clara's own ragged breathing. She pressed her forehead against his and let herself break. Let herself feel every piece of the 5 years she'd thought he was gone. Every moment of loneliness. Every night she'd reached for him and found only empty space. But underneath the grief, there was something else. Something warm and fierce. He had come back. Not the way she'd imagined. Not whole or healed or with time to spare. But he had come back, and he had given her the greatest gift he could, 2 pieces of himself that would go on living. Emma crawled into Clara's lap, and Eliza followed. Clara wrapped her arms around them both, holding them tight as the stars outside burned cold and bright. "Is Daddy gone?" Emma whispered. "Yes, baby, he's gone. Where did he go?" Clara looked out the window at the sky. "Somewhere beautiful. Somewhere he's not in pain anymore," Eliza sniffled. "Will we see him again?" "I don't know. Maybe. But until then, we have each other." And that's enough. The girls didn't answer. They just held on. And Clara Thornhill, the giant widow who had learned to live without hope, felt it bloom again in her chest. Not the wild, reckless hope of her youth, but something quieter, stronger, the kind of hope that knows grief and chooses to keep going anyway, the kind of hope that builds a life from the ashes and calls it home. Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into months. Clara buried Thomas on the hill behind the house, under the oak tree where they used to sit and watch the sunset. She carved his name into a simple wooden cross and planted wildflowers around the grave. The girls helped. They were good at helping, good at laughing when the grief got too heavy, good at reminding Clara that life was still worth living. The ranch came back to life slowly. Clara fixed the fence posts, repaired the barn roof, brought in new cattle. Emma learned to milk the cows. Eliza learned to gather eggs without scaring the chickens. They worked together, the 3 of them, building something new from the ruins of what had been lost. One evening, as the sun set and the sky turned the color of fire, Clara stood on the porch with the girls beside her. Emma held her hand. Eliza leaned against her hip, and for the first time in 5 years, Clara felt whole. "Mummy?" Emma asked. "Yes, sweetheart." "Do you think Daddy's proud of us?" Clara looked down at her, then up at the stars beginning to appear. "I know he is." "How do you know?" Clara smiled. "Because I can feel it. Every time I look at you too, every time you laugh or run or do something brave. That's him. That's the part of him that's still here." Emma nodded, satisfied. "Good, I want him to be proud. He is, baby. I promise." They stood there together as the night settled in, 3 hearts beating in rhythm, 3 lives woven together by love and loss and the stubborn refusal to give up. Clara had thought her story ended the day Thomas disappeared. But she'd been wrong. It hadn't ended. It had just been waiting for 2 little girls to walk through her barn door and call her mummy, waiting for her to remember that love doesn't die when a person does. It just changes shape, and sometimes, if you're lucky, it comes back to you in ways you never expected. The stars don't lie, and neither does the giant widow who learned to count them again. If this story stirred something in your chest, if it made you believe in second chances and the kind of love that refuses to die, then you're exactly who this channel was made for. Stories like Clara and Thomas's remind us that family isn't just about who you start with. It's about who refuses to let go. It's about the people who walk 100 miles just to bring you home. So if you believe in love that endures, in hope that rebuilds, and in the fierce, unbreakable bond between a mother and her children, hit that subscribe button. Because we're just getting started, and the next story might be the one that changes everything. Welcome home.